Hello everyone, welcome to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode I'm going to be talking you through how to prepare for a Hilly triathlon. The reason I'm covering this subject is because, 2 weeks today, as I'm recording this, will be Ironman Wales, and this famously hilly race catches an awful lot of people off guard. And even if you're not taking on Ironman Wales, if you take on any courses that have hills in them, this should help you. And even if you are the kind of athlete who just sticks to the safest, flattest courses that they can find, I really hope that this will give you the confidence and the courage to tackle on something with a little bit more teeth, something that's got a bit more challenge to it. Because I know the hills can be intimidating, but the satisfaction you get for completing a hilly race is pretty incredible. And it has to be said, there are hilly races and there are hilly races. So if we look at the Ironman distance as an example, you have the sort of the flattest races will have a few hundred meters of elevation in them. It's difficult to get much less over 180 kilometers. Whereas if you look at the likes of Ironman Wales, Ironman Lanzarote, they're closer to 2,500. Now, if you don't understand what elevation gain means, it's if you imagine if you got a massive stick that was 2,800 meters long and you pointed it right up at the sky, that is how much elevation you're going to cover over the course of the ride. Now, of course, depending on the course that you're on, it's going to depend on whether that's going to be a long, slow ascent or whether it is going to be steeper. Now, Ironman Wales is well known for being sort of very relentless. There are lots of hills back to back to back to back, much like the old Ironman UK course at Bolton. There really is very little respite. You can't really get yourself into much of a rhythm because all of the hills are of different sort of length, of different steepness. I don't think there's any that are much over a few kilometres long, but the hills are so different that you can't just get yourself into a rhythm and just knock it out. Some flatter Ironmans, the likes of Barcelona, you can just settle into your cadence, your rhythm, you get comfortable and you tick off the miles. Whereas with these hillier Ironmans, you are changing gears, you're approaching the next hill, you're navigating the descents. There's a huge amount going on. So what I'm going to do before we get too far is I'm going to look at the setup of your bike and how much difference equipment will make. Now, the first thing I wanted to look at was the weight of the bike itself, because this is something that people obsess over, okay? There's even a term for people that have this mindset called weight weenies, okay? People who will avoid wrapping their handlebars. People who will use special lightweight bolts for their bike to make sure that they are that they are saving as much weight as possible. And, it is nice to have a lightweight bike. Now, I did a bit of an experiment. So I took an athlete of mine, I created them a sort of a race plan for the World Championships in Nice. Okay, it's going to be the last edition of it this year, but I used a World Championship course. And this is 180 kilometers going up a mountain. It's sort of the main climb, and then there's some longer hills there as well, but there's a huge mountain climb. And so I input all the detail, and his weight was one of the areas that I could change with the sliders in best bike split. And so I lowered his weight by 1 kilo to see what that would do. Now, picture this, okay? The athlete weighs in at about 70 kilos, okay? And the bike weighs about 7-8 kilos. How much time do you think this athlete managed to save over 180 kilometers, including around 2,500 meters of elevation gain for saving 1 kilo? It is less than a minute. Less than 1 minute for a kilogram saved. Now, think about a bike. If we are looking to pick up a bike that we're planning to spend about £2,000 on, okay? And we're looking at this bike and we're picking it up and it feels very nice. And then we see the next model up, okay? That's a kilo lighter, the frame. This could be closer to £3,000, £4,000 for a bike that's a kilo lighter. And as you go up through the, into more expensive bikes, then this just gets an awful lot more expensive to save weight. But at this sort of price range, then yeah, you could be looking at spending £1,000 or £2,000 to get a bike that's a kilo lighter, for the sake of saving a minute, maybe. And at the end of the day, a minute's a minute. If you were to save 5 kilos, you would save 5 minutes. And for somebody who is looking to qualify, well, not looking to qualify for the World Championship events at Nice, but a similar event with a similar amount of elevation, if you were able to save sort of 5 kilos between your wheels, your bike, and losing a bit around the middle yourself, okay, yeah, 5 minutes, that's a lot. However, if we look at how much we might have to spend to lose that much weight, if we look at the length of the day of an Ironman, okay, that minute, it's not going to count for very much at all, chances are. I would be surprised, it's not impossible, I'd be surprised if it was a difference between somebody qualifying for the World Championships or not. Or if it was a difference between them sort of gaining a position on opponents or not. Again, it could be. But if you look at, if we say somebody's very competitive, if we're looking at a 10-hour day, if somebody is looking to complete an Ironman in around about 10 hours, spending, all that money to save 1 minute, okay, if you're at the point in your Ironman journey where you are looking to splash that kind of cash to see those kinds of gains, cool, that may be at the point where you are. But think of all of the other things that you could do to save that minute. Think of how quickly that minute could disappear in the other disciplines if you drop a chain. There are so many things in over the course of an Ironman that could cost you a minute or more. You do have to say to yourself, well, you know what? For the same cost as saving a kilo on my bike, I could hire Simon to coach me for an entire year. What do you think is actually going to make you faster? Working with a coach or 1 kilogram? Now, if we take this data and we apply it to flatter courses, the gains become even more incremental. Okay, you are going to be saving seconds, a handful of seconds, by having a lighter bike from maybe sort of improved acceleration. Yes, but again, this does come down to somebody's handling skills, I have to say. But the amount of time that you can save by being really sort of anal about how much your bike weighs. I mean, it just for me, it really doesn't stack up. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is, if you are a competitive Ironman athlete, if you are the kind of athlete who really wants to optimize every element of their performance, then yes, saving excess weight on the bike is a very good way to go about this. A minute could be a long time to certain people. But if you're just taking on your first Ironman, don't feel the need to break the bank to go over your budget to get a bike, because the bike is one of the first purchases that people tend to make when they're looking to start triathlon, because, well, it's very difficult to train for a 180-kilometre bike ride if you don't have a bike. But by people blowing their budget on a bike that is 1 kilo lighter and might maybe save them a minute, if that means they can't work with a coach, if that means that they can't go to a training camp, if that means they're going to sort of try to get a free training plan rather than, paying to get a good one, if that means that they're not going to be able to, go on a training holiday, if that means that they're going to have to get a really cheap wetsuit, it just doesn't add up, okay? So if you're just starting out, there are much better things to spend your money on than, spending four figures or above to try to save a kilo on a bike. However, there are going to be some of you who sat there, and I briefly alluded to it earlier. Well, what about me? What if I lose kilograms off of me? And yes, obviously, that is the preferential way to lose weight, assuming that somebody is in a position where they can and should be losing weight. As a rough frame of reference, most men shouldn't really spend much time below sort of 6, maybe 8% body fat. Depends on the individual. Some people can be healthy at a lower body fat percentage than others. But once you get to that 6 to 8% for men, then you really are sort of you're gonna get problems. It's gonna have much more of a negative effect on your performance if you're at that low body fat as a triathlete. Now, for women, this sort of lower limit is much higher. It's about 14%, and it's just the way that we're made. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you are an athlete who is trying to get to these lower ends of the body fat percentage range, okay, if you consider the amount of sacrifice that's going to take, if you imagine likely the missed sessions, the blunted adaptations that you're going to get, unless you are doing it under the sort of the supervision of a dietitian, I really, and a coach, I really recommend against pushing the limits. Because when you think, okay, well, maybe I could lose another 2 kilos, that's only going to give you another 2 minutes. And it's very difficult to be able to maintain that high level of fitness with a low body fat percentage, because you need to fuel those sessions and you need to recover from those sessions. It's very difficult to get it right. However, there will be some of you out there who are going, look, I'm closer to, I'm well into the 20s, 30% body fat. I know I need to lose weight. I want to lose weight. And yet, if you are in that position, then, if we're looking at somebody who may be able to lose a good sort of 10 kilos, maybe, 10 minutes, yeah, I'll take that off of an Ironman time, absolutely. But for those who are already at the pointy end of affairs, I want them to move away from thinking that the best way to prepare for a Hilly triathlon is to lose as much weight as possible and to sink a load of money into the lightest bike possible. It will help, but probably not as much as you think. And sort of the sacrifices that you'll be making elsewhere in your training to accommodate that, both financially and physiologically, probably not going to add up. On the subject of the bike, I'm going to touch on gear ratios. Now, this is your choice of cassette and chain rings. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with this, some people who go, I just ride my bike, I don't know much about it. I'm going to start right from the bottom here. If you are confident with bikes, you may want to skip ahead by sort of 2 or 3 minutes here. So, at the front of the bike, where you have your pedals, which are attached to crank arms. And the crank arms, your drive side one at least is attached to something called the chain set. Okay, now the chain set is either 1, 2, or 3 big rings that the chain runs around at the front end of the bike. 3 rings is very rare nowadays. The reason for that is that manufacturers, as they have managed to fit more gears onto the back of the bike, have discovered that they can get the same range of gears with 2 chain rings as they used to be able to get with 3. So if you have 11 or 12 gears on the back, you don't need to have as many gears on the front. It is possible that your bike only has 1 chainring at the front. Now, this hasn't really caught on in triathlon so much. It has very much in the mountain bike world, but the mountain bike cassettes will have much bigger gaps between gears than a road cassette will. And as a result, you don't need to worry about finding that perfect gear for that rhythm if you're on a mountain bike, because there's so much variation in the terrain. But if we're road riding, if we only have a single chainring at the front, then the jumps between gears are going to be too big. So you may find yourself, this gear feels a bit too hard, let's make it feel easier, change down a gear, oh no, this is way too easy, change up, no, it's too hard again. We want to avoid that on the road, because we could be riding on that gradient for a good sort of 5-10 minutes, whereas a mountain biker wouldn't be. But I would wager that you have 2 chain rings on the front. As a result, you'll have a big ring and a small ring. Now, the big ring is what we generally use on the flat. The small ring we generally save for the climbs, or when your legs are absolutely shot. There's nothing inherently wrong with using the small chain ring, but for most riders, they're just going to be able to find a comfortable cadence and give you more powerful in that big ring. Now, the size of your small ring is going to have a very real impact on how easy it is for you to ride up hills, because the smaller the ring at the front of the bike, the easier it's going to be to pedal, and the larger the big ring on the chain set, the harder it's going to be to pedal. Now, I don't generally recommend that you just go fiddling about changing this yourself, because there's all sorts of pitfalls potentially with chain length, with the way that the whole system works, that are going to result in you potentially getting yourself into really into trouble by thinking, oh, it would be really easy, I just get myself a small chain ring, and then the chain starts jumping and it starts slipping. There's an awful lot that can go wrong. So I recommend, if you're looking to change your chain rings, that you go to a bike shop and you say, or a mechanic, and say, I'm thinking of getting a smaller chain ring. What can you recommend? What do you think my bike would be able to accommodate? Could you order it in for me, and could you install it for me? What would the prices be? And this can really make a significant difference. And one of the reasons that I'm doing this podcast, as I am, a couple of weeks out from Ironman Wales, is that if you think, geez, you know what, this might be the answer, it gives you 2 weeks to be able to sort it out. Now, I've never changed the chain rings on my bike. Maybe I should have at some point. But if you are running a compact cassette, which you'll find on most road bikes, you should have the gears that you need if you have a wide enough cassette, which brings us onto the cassette itself. Now, the cassette is the block of gears on your rear wheel, and the number of gears that you have in your cassette, as well as the size of them, is going to have a real impact on how easy it is to get up the climbs. Now, if you have an older bike, you may have as little as 7 gears on your cassette, whereas if you have a very new bike, you might have 12. By the time that you're listening to this, who knows, maybe even more. But your cassette is expressed as 2 numbers. So, as an example, it could be an 1125 or an 1128 or an 1130. And that refers to the smallest gear on the cassette and the largest gear on the cassette. So, you have, it's very rare you get anything except an 11 these days that you start off with as your smallest gear, which some people call the biggest gear because it's the hardest gear. But I'm gonna go by the size of the cogs to try and keep it simple. So the smallest cog has 11 teeth on it, and you move up the cassette until you get to your largest ring. Now, the largest ring could be, the smallest that you really get is a 23, and that is a very narrow cassette. And that is the kind of cassette that somebody would use if they're on an absolutely pan-flat time trial race with very little elevation change, because they can find the exact sweet spot they want to. I've actually got a 10-speed cassette that is, I think it's a 1223 actually. Don't even own a 10-speed bike anymore. I don't know why I've still got it, but it's knocking around. I'm not sure I've ever really used it much. Whereas realistically, most are going to start at 25 as a minimum. Now, an 1125 you get on a lot of time trial bikes, and this is where some people get themselves into trouble, including myself. Because when I took on Ironman UK in 2019, I didn't change my cassette out, and I paid the price. Because I was riding on a standard crankset for a start, and I had an 1125. Now, This, if you have only 25 cogs as your easiest gear, you are going to struggle on steep hills. If you're going up a more gentle mountain, you might be okay. Something like Ironman Nice, you might be able to get away with it, because on the flats you value having the smaller jump between the gears. However, if you are taking on a course like Ironman Wales, if they're going to be steep hills, you're going to want something closer to an 11:28. Now, you could, I guess there's sort of a masochistic part of some people who say, oh, you know what, I would, I can do it in my gear, I'll be fine, I can just push through, I don't need to have these easier gears. I mean, you could, but you're just using unnecessary energy for the sake of sort of showing off, really. Um, I would, if you're taking on a course that has gradients over 10% for prolonged periods, I'd say look, you need to look at sort of an 11:28 at the minimum. Some group sets, it depends on the group set you've got, go all the way up to an 11:34. And now, if you ride something like that, even or 11:34 and 11:32, the steep hills are going to be so much easier because you can get into a much lower gear. Combine this with perhaps a smaller, small ring on your chain set, and you're looking at a very different picture to somebody who is taking on a standard crank set and a standard cassette of 11:25. So if I've lost you there, I apologise if I have. The point that I want to make is if you're taking on a steep course, such as Ironman Wales with lots of steep hills, you probably want to have an 11:28 cassette. If you don't have a cassette that's 11:28, you may want to upgrade it to an 11:28. But even if you have that 11:28, don't be afraid to go 11:30, 11:32. There's no shame in it. It's not cheating. In fact, an athlete of mine, James, who I think for next week's episode, ahead of Ironman Wales, I may actually just do a replay of the episode that we recorded last year. He had an 11:28 on his bike, and a few weeks out from the event, I said to him, look, what cassette have you got? And I said, look, let's think about getting an 11:32. I can't remember if it was part of the episode or not. I think it might be. I think he actually said that saved me. Like, I wouldn't have made it round if I didn't change to that 11:32. So it just made the hills so much easier. Now, unfortunately, aside from simply buying the cassette, we have to install it. And if you want to change a cassette, you need to have a cassette tool and you need to have a chain whip. And if you are looking to cycle for many years, these are fantastic investments. I highly recommend you get one. But if you're taking on an event and you're not sure how much you're going to ride afterwards, there's no point buying these tools a couple of weeks out from what may be the last cycle event that you ever do. So taking it to a bike shop to get it installed is a good way to go about it. Additionally, you need to take into consideration your rear derailleur or your rear mech on your bike. Because the larger the cassette, the larger the rear derailleur needs to go. Now, if you have a rear derailleur that just comes with a narrow cassette that when you bought the bike, chances are if you want to go above 25, you may need to go for a long cage derailleur, they're called. And you'll need to take your bike into the local bike shop or hop on forums, I guess, and go, look, this is my bike, this is my group set that I have. It should have the name of the group set written on the rear derailleur. I want to change cassette. Can the derailleur that I have accommodate this cassette? And add a photo, or if you're posting it online, so people will be able to advise you on what to do. If you need to get a new derailleur, straight to the bike shop. Especially if you've got Ironman Wales in a couple of weeks. I'm relatively confident installing a rear derailleur myself and indexing it, but I've been in the sport a long time. If you are new, if you don't really know what you're doing, take it to a bike shop. Say, look, I want to increase the gears available on my bike. Well, not the gears, but the cassette. I want to get a wider cassette. I'd like to get this cassette. I'm going to take your advice on which rear derailleur I need. Tell me how much I'm looking at here. Now the bill for this whole job might end up being around about 150 quid. Maybe more. It depends on the labour, it depends on the availability of the part, it depends on the cassette that you have. I mean, if you've got Dura-Race, it may be a lot more than that. But it really is money well spent if it's going to help you get over those hills a lot easier. Now, going back to the weight of the bike itself, I think we need to be really careful that we don't end up sort of taking off of our bike things that we might need for the sake of maybe saving a few seconds over the course of a race. Now, the things that people will often leave because they think, oh, you know what, I'm not going to need those, would be extra bottles of water. It could be saddlebags with spares in them. It could even be, in some cases, nutrition. And the amount of weight you could save from this is minuscule. Now, I remember when I first started doing triathlon, and I had my £500 Specialized Alley, and I took it to Richmond Park, and I was riding around. And I actually made a point of taking my keys, putting my house key off of the rest of my keys, tucking my house key onto my bike. I had a little saddlebag where I had the minimum amount of stuff in it, because I felt that the weight penalty from carrying my full keychain around was going to hurt me on the hills. I mean, it's quite laughable really now I think about it, but at the time that was the mindset that I had. I did get myself into an awful lot of trouble doing this, because I would then grab my keys, walk out the house, get back in, realise that I didn't have my house key on me and that it was actually still in my saddlebag, in the bike, in the house. Embarrassing. But as triathletes, especially when we're racing, we don't want to get to the point where we go, oh, you know what, I should be fine if I only carry one bottle of water. During a longer event, such as a 70.3, we are just running the risk of absolute disaster for the sake of saving, less than a minute, perhaps, overall. Now, one of the things I think that people get into their head when it comes to hills, especially in races, is they overestimate just how much time they lose on a hill. Now, if I were to go up a hill and somebody were to ride past me and I see them disappearing ahead of me, I may feel really down, I may feel really frustrated. Oh God, I can't believe, I'm just not where I need to be on the hills. I'm not fit enough, I'm not light enough, whatever that could be. But it could be that they're only actually getting 10-20 seconds on me over that hill. Of course, now, from where I am at the time, watching them ride away from me, that's hard for me to see. It's hard for me to watch them riding up the hill away from me. But how much sooner are they actually getting to the top of the hill? And when we get on the flat, am I going to be overtaking them again? Because when we're on the flats, it's not quite so obvious when people are passing us. Somebody will go past us and we think, oh, that's the faster cyclist. We don't try to hold their wheel. We don't beat ourselves up that somebody just went flying past us like we were standing still. But we just, we take a deep breath and we go, okay, right, I'm just going to stick to my plan. As soon as the road points uphill, suddenly we really get it inside our heads. It becomes a real ego thing. Now, on the subject of ego, I wanted to cover, how hills can really get in our heads. Now, a lot of people, when they are cycling, they are more than happy to cycle for prolonged periods on flat terrain. And they're more than happy to take the front wheel off their bike. But if you ask somebody who's a non-cyclist to remove the rear wheel from a bicycle, they'll probably have a little bit of a meltdown. Because they go, oh, the rear wheel, that's so difficult. I couldn't. Even if they can remove the front one. Now, if they knew that, to replace a rear wheel, remove a rear wheel, you have to put your bike in the smallest gear at the back, and just sort of pull the derailleur back, and the wheel should pop out. Suddenly, that's not so intimidating, but people have spent so long grappling with it in the past that they get it in their head that it's a lot more difficult than it is. And the same is true for hills. It's often sort of a similar group of people who are just starting out cycling, haven't been cycling very long. Oh God, the hills. Okay, it's so hard. There's a hill on the route. I just want you to know there is a hill. This is not a drill. There is a hill. And of course, different people's definition of a hill can differ slightly. But for a lot of people, they get to a hill and they think this is the main event. They think this is the chance to prove themselves. This is their moment where they're going to conquer gravity and they're going to haul themselves over this hill. This may also be the mindset of somebody who does a lot of group riding. If they're heading out with a group and every time they get to a hill, it turns into a little bit of a race. I had this mindset myself. Bottom of a hill, where does the Strava segment start? There. Okay, off I go. Boom. Try to set a personal best. Dig really hard. Heart rate into the 170s. It's a hill. This is a terrible approach to take as a triathlete. Like, you could not get it more wrong. When you are going up a hill as a triathlete during a triathlon, assuming that it is a 70.3 or an Ironman, and that's roughly what we're talking about here, roughly loosely talking about the Ironman Wales course in Tenby, you need to get up that hill as efficiently as possible, not as fast as you can. Now, there is you may have heard people talk about this, sort of an idea within cycling of burning matches. The idea being, you start a ride with a box full of matches, and every time you make a hard acceleration, every time you push hard, you burn a match. Okay? Now once a match is burnt, it's useless, it's discarded. Okay? It's of no good to anyone. And as triathletes, not only is this going to affect us later in the bike, it's also going to affect our run as well. Now, we don't really want to be burning matches unnecessarily, and every time you accelerate, every time you push up that hill hard, you're burning one match, maybe 2 matches, 3 matches, depending on how hard you're going and how steep the hill is. And you are damaging the rest of your bike performance, you are damaging your run performance, especially if you're doing this within the first third of the bike, to try and keep up with other people or try to push out your advantage because you really enjoy the bike. You are really hurting your performance. Instead, what we need to do is we need to try to stick to our race power. And if we cannot stay at our race power, we simply need to get up that hill with the least amount of effort possible. So that is having the easiest gear setup that we can, having a smaller chainring, having a wider cassette. Okay? These are important to make sure that we can ride up that hill and still be at that kind of conversational pace where we could probably have a chat with someone as we're going up this hill, rather than seeing it as being your life's ambition to get to the top of this hill as quickly as possible. Because, it's good for the ego. It's nice to see Strava segments come up. Oh, you're in the top 10% on this climb. But if you end up walking pretty much the entire marathon, it doesn't matter. Something that I keep telling athletes is nobody cares what your FTP is when you're walking the marathon. Okay? It doesn't matter how many Strava PBs you have. It doesn't matter what your FTP is. It doesn't matter about your normalized power. If you are walking that Ironman marathon, okay, it all bets off. Everything that you worked on has gone out the window. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with walking the Ironman marathon at all, but given the choice between running the marathon and walking the marathon, I think we'd all choose to run the marathon if we could. Let's get it over with quickly. Let's get a good time on the cards. And the harder that you push on the bike, the worse experience you are going to have on the run. But it is a balancing act, okay? We can't go so easy that we miss the cut-off. That would be an absolute disaster. Equally, if we are strong cyclists, we can't afford to just soft pedal our way round, okay? We need to get the balance right. But if we are trying to get up the hills as efficiently as we can, and if they're steep hills, we're going to be over our race power targets on these hills. We're trying to get at them with the lowest power possible. So we're staying seated, we're breathing, we're spinning our legs, we're going up them slowly. Okay? Practice this in your own training ahead of race day, because it's a really important skill to master. Not to let the hill get into your head, not to see it as a test or a challenge. Okay? It's just another obstacle in your way as you head towards that dismount line and start the marathon. However, I also want to touch on the subject of momentum. And this is something that I think is underrated within a lot of people's race plans, race preparation, within just their racing in general, which is maximising on momentum that we already have. Now, if I'm riding along and I'm going into a hill at around about 25 kilometers per hour, okay, then I know when I see that hill ahead of me and I go, right, I need my small ring for this. I change up a couple of gears on my cassette and then change into the small ring. Because chances are that leave me at roughly the same gear that I was before I made those shifts. But the important thing is, I am in my small ring at the bottom of the hill. Then as the hill gets steeper, I drop down my gears, okay? So I drop down my gears and I get to my smallest gear. The biggest gear on the back, on the cassette. And I am riding up this hill as efficiently as I can, okay? I am not going in like the absolute clippers. I'm not sprinting into the hill at 40 kilometers an hour to try to make the most of the momentum that I already have. However, if you are on a course such as Tenby or any other hilly course, it may well feel at parts like it's a little bit of a roller coaster. And you will be descending down a hill and come straight into the next hill. Now, looking at this next hill, if it is a short hill and a steep hill, we've got two options, okay? Either we go, well, Simon said you've got to make sure that you're in your small ring at the bottom of the hill so you can change through your gears as you go up the hill. Which again, it's fine if you are entering a hill from the flat, but if we have about 45 kilometers an hour of speed behind us, we do not want to lose that speed. We do not want to be fiddling around with our gears, okay? Now, it depends on the length of the hill. It depends on how steep the hill is. But I want you to consider, if you have an enormous amount of momentum, is the most efficient use of energy, rather than spending a minute cycling up that hill in your easiest gear possible, is it better to dig deep for 20 seconds or haul yourself over the top of it? Because by going deep for those 20 seconds, you're probably using less energy than you would by riding up the whole thing really easily. And it's very rare that we find ourselves in these situations where this is a possibility, but you do need to keep it, in your mind. You do need to think to yourself, is it more economical to go hard for a short period of time than easy for a long period of time within the context of this hill that I'm going up? If it is a long hill that you're going up, you need to, you would be coasting down that downhill. You go to yourself, okay, I can see there's a long hill up ahead, so I'm going to change into my small ring so that by the time that I start pedaling, I'll be in a gear that's manageable. If I try to stay in my big ring and do it in my big ring, I'll then have to change down into my small ring and I will lose momentum. But you change into your small ring, then you get onto this long hill and you go up the gears, up the back of the cassette towards the biggest gear. And you then get to a point and you ride up that long hill at a steady rate. But we are freewheeling down that and we're trying to make the most of our momentum. If it is a really long hill and you go, right, I'm going to really use my momentum, I'm going to go into over FTP to try and hold this speed that I've got from the descent into the uphill. Yeah, it'll work. It will work. But you will soon start to run out of gas. Okay? And when you run out of gas, you will really slow down because you've dug really deep. And people who've taken it a bit more carefully will actually start to pass you. As they have paced the hill and they've gone, right, this is a long hill. I need to settle in. Whereas you trying to make the most of all that momentum, you have unfortunately dug yourself a little bit of a hole. Now, burning matches is not inherently bad as long as you are getting something for burning that match, such as getting over a hill a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently, using momentum that you already have. So that is a good use of a match. At the end of the day, we have a matchbook with us, so we can burn some matches when needs be. But we want to try to start the run with as many as we can. because I mean, I normally say, if somebody's taking on triathlon, and especially if they're not used to the distance, especially if it's the first time they've done it, wait until the second half of the run to really start to ramp things up. Go into the first half of it just trying to like maintain a steady pace, keep things turning over. Once you get to the second half of the run, that's when you can start going, right, okay, let me see what I can do. We want to have as many matches as possible available for us when we get to this point where we can really turn the screw, try and bring it home. I also touched on the downhills, coasting the downhills. Now, I've heard, a number of people who I respect say you should either be doing one of two things on the downhill. You should either be riding at your race power, or you should be freewheeling. And I'm probably inclined to agree, actually. I feel that if your legs are going round at sort of 100 and 110 RPM, that's just not an efficient use of energy, really. You're working so hard to be able to to be able to keep your legs pedaling around, that it is a waste of energy. You're not going that much faster than you would be freewheeling and using a lot of energy to achieve that. And right, if in doubt, freewheel down the hills. Really, you need to focus on what it is that you're doing when you're descending. Okay, it can be quite dangerous depending on the hill. And we really need to stay cognizant. We really need to focus on what it is that we're doing. And if that means freewheeling rather than trying to push the pedals around, so be it. It does depend on your level as well. If you are somebody looking to win their age group, qualify for a world championship, then you probably need to give it a bit of gusto on the downhill. But chances are you've done this distance several times before and you know what you're capable of. If you're just looking to complete your first event, really, I encourage you to freewheel on the downhills, especially the steep ones. Maybe if there's a little bit of a false downhill flat, you might want to put some power down. But at the end of the day, when we're descending, safety should be our absolute priority. And the reason for this is that it is very common for triathletes to get themselves in trouble on the downhills in races. Because, I mean, it may be a sort of mixture of fatigue from getting up the hill, it may be over-enthusiasm, it could be they vastly overestimate their own handling skills, but a lot of triathletes overshooting corners, ending up in hedges, getting themselves into all sorts of unnecessary trouble because they're pushing the limits on the downhill. Now, I did an episode, it must be about 4 months ago now, 5 months ago, on the risk-reward ratio in triathlon. So, the risk that I'm taking, what is the potential reward here? Now, again, if you are an elite level athlete looking to race on the world stage, then you might need to take a few calculated risks on the descent to make sure that you are, maximising your chances of finishing, in the position you want to. If you're a first-time athlete who just wants to get round this bike course and start the marathon, okay, do not take risks on the downhill. It's fun, don't get me wrong. Riding down a hill fast is good fun. But especially if there are hairpins, especially if it's on a mountain or anything like that, if there's going to be ravines nearby, be careful, throttle back, don't take any risks, okay? You are not a professional athlete who needs to put everything on the line to land the next big sponsorship deal that's going to pay your house off, okay? You are just an age group athlete, and you are trying to get round this course in one piece, and that should be our primary motivator. Now, if somebody is going down a descent that's 2 kilometers long, the athlete who really pushes the limits on the descent, and the athlete who goes down it, I wouldn't say tiptoes down it, they're not riding their brakes. Please don't ride your brakes, which is where you are constantly braking as you're going downhill. That generates heat in your brakes and that can lead to brake failure. Okay, try to only brake when you need to, and if you do find yourself wanting to slow yourself down, try to pulse the brakes. So brake for a bit, then release the brakes, allow them to cool a little bit for 10, 20 seconds, and then feather them a little bit, apply a little bit more. Okay, if you sit there and you're just holding the brake levers in on the way down a long descent, you are going to really impact the ability of your brakes to actually stop the bike, and they won't be there for you when you actually need them. So I got distracted there. But yeah, the athlete who really pushes the limit, relative to the athlete who does go down it a bit more slowly, might be like 20 seconds, 30 seconds. It's not, again, it depends on just how fast somebody's going or just how slowly someone's going. Again, it's like the downhill, the uphill. We can see an athlete ahead of us and go, they're pulling away. I'm losing so much time. But we haven't even started the run yet. You could pass them within the first kilometre of the run and you'd never see them again. And you would never know. Chances are, unless they had a very distinctive tri-suit. We need to look at the entire of the event, not just the bit of road that we're on at the moment, not just the bike leg. Okay, we are looking at the entirety of the event and going, what is going to get me home? Now, the best way to become a better descender is simply to practice. And this is one of the downsides of somebody who rides on the turbo trainer all the time, is they don't learn the bike handling skills that are required to be able to ride downhill efficiently. And again, everything in moderation. I'm not saying that, you should do every ride outside that you can. I'm doing a lot of riding on the turbo at the moment, despite the fact it's still September, because it means that I can stay with my dog. Okay, she gets upset if I leave the house without her more than once a day. And so I just try to spend time with my dog. And one way that I can go about that is I can ride on the turbo instead of going outside. If it's just an hour's ride, there's no big difference. However, if we are doing long rides, we really should be looking to get these done outside where possible to improve our handling skills, to improve our ability to fix mechanicals, to learn about our bike, to ride in different weathers. There is a huge skill set that cannot be developed from the turbo trainer. I'm a huge fan of indoor training, but I really, really implore you to get some good riding done outside. I do recommend, if you are preparing for an Ironman, it's a bit late if you're looking to do 10B in a couple of weeks, I do recommend get 100 miles done outside ahead of your event. Now, I think to wrap up the bike section, the underlying message is try to be as efficient as possible. Try to get the hills with the least amount of energy required. Now, if you are an athlete who is definitely going to be flirting with the cut-offs, you need to keep the average speed required to get round the course in the forefront of your mind. Because, it depends on your swim time. But I think most people, they're going to be looking around about that sort of 22 kilometers per hour mark. Generally speaking, is what you're going to want to be looking at as an average to complete your Ironman event. And if you are looking at your average speed and it's closer to 19 kilometers an hour, then you probably need to think about, okay, right, I do need to pick up the pace here because I do need to make this bike cut off. Now, this is a very generalised statement, but if you can make the bike cut off, chances are, by hook or by crook, you can complete the Ironman marathon within the cut-offs. Most people can walk fast enough to get round the Ironman marathon without sort of major issues. Now, of course, if somebody does have a gastrointestinal upset, spend a lot of time in the portaloos, if somebody ends up with cramps, if somebody ends up hobbling because of an injury, these are all things that can affect it. But even if you take really long walk breaks, okay, as long as you're running bits, then you should realistically be able to get round the marathon within the 6.5 hours, broadly speaking. Different races vary. Normally around 6.5 hours you have to complete the marathon. And when you consider that it takes around about an hour to walk 3 miles or 5 kilometres, you should understand that you don't actually maybe need to do as much running as you might think. Of course, this is assuming that you finish the bike right on the cutoff. If you finish that bike with an hour to spare, things would have to go quite badly wrong for you to fail to finish on the run. Again, it happens. I'm not shaming anyone who fails to complete the run at all, but it is normally the bike that is the major cause of people failing to make the cut-offs from at least a fitness perspective. However, once you get onto the run, it does not necessarily mean it's going to be plain sailing. In fact, Ironman Wales, along with a lot of other hilly races, also tend to have a hilly run. Now, this isn't always the case. If you look at the likes of Ironman Nice, that has a nice seafront run, largely flat for the most part, at least from what I remember from looking at the course. You're probably not going to go run into an enormous amount of problems. However, if you are racing at a hilly event with a hilly run, then we do need to reframe certain things in our mind. And the biggest thing you need to come to terms with on a hilly run is the fact that you're probably going to be walking a lot of, if not most of the hills, especially over an Ironman. Because the amount of energy that it takes to run up a hill relative to walking up a hill, and the difference in time, is probably one of the least efficient things to do. Now, if you look at ultra marathoners, none of them run up hills. They always hike up the hills. It's what they bring their poles for, because it is so energy inefficient to run up a long steep hill. Now, if it is a short hill, if you're taking part in a shorter race, this is fine. You know, again, there is definitely a place for working on your ability to run up hills. If you are taking on the run in Ironman Wales, then you are most likely going to be walking up the major hills, or at least power walking up them. If somebody's a really competitive runner, if somebody's going to be looking at sort of sub 4 for the Ironman marathon, yeah, they're probably going to be running up that hill. But for the vast majority of athletes, you'll be much better off to just accept, look, I'm going to have to walk this hill, but that's fine because they'll be able to run the other parts of the course. Then try and be a hero on the first lap. Try and run up the hill to the cheers of all the spectators. Hey, somebody's running, good on you, lad. Or lady, depending on who you are. And, you're going to feel great. I just ran that. And then you have to walk the next 5 kilometres as your legs are absolutely full of lactic acid. And you walk up the next 3 laps that you do as well. Okay? You do need to reframe this in your mind and go, look, I'm trying to get round this run course as efficiently as I can, rather than trying to push to make up, 30 seconds by running up this hill rather than walking it. Now, as for hilly runs, there's not nearly as much of them as the sort of hilly bike courses, simply because, well, there's less moving parts. It's just you and your feet. But I can completely understand why somebody training for a hilly event might think I need to do lots of hills in my training. But please don't get overly specific, especially a long way out from your event, okay? It's more important to build that aerobic base with that easy running. And yes, definitely add in hill reps, add in some hilly longer runs, especially in the last couple of months ahead of a race, if you want to be able to run some of these hills on the course. But don't get to the point where you're trying to show off. I mean, I remember when I did Ironman UK, some of my friends, 2 of my friends came up to support me, and they were spectating in Queen's Park, and there is it's a relatively steep hill as far as Ironman run courses go. They go up through Queen's Park, and that's where my friends were spectating because it was a good spot for spectators. And it really sort of like hurt my soul knowing that as I came into the park, because I didn't want to walk in front of my friends who had travelled a long way to see me, that I was going to have to run through the park, up the hill, up through the gates, do a left, and then start walking again. Because I burned a lot of matches running up that hill. Again, it wasn't the smartest thing to do for my race, but again, I wanted to put on something of a show for my friends. Not the most efficient way to do it, but we all make mistakes. We all have to make our own judgments. And I just worked so unnecessarily hard on that section, it really hurt me for the next leg. So there we have it. Now, how you approach a hilly race is going to depend largely on your intentions for that event. Are you looking to qualify for an event? Are you just looking to get round? Are you looking to set a PB? Are you just there for fun? It is going to depend on that. But just try not to get too caught up in everything. Try not to, I can't say that I'm innocent of that myself, but try not to push unnecessarily hard on different elements of the course because you feel that you should, and instead really focus on getting around the course as efficiently as possible, because I want you, when you come into that second half of the run, to have as much energy as possible. If you are racing Tembe in a couple of weeks, wishing you the absolute very best of luck. I've actually launched a new service on my website. If you follow, link down in my bio to my programs, where I'm now doing a race planning consultation, where for £50 we can sit down for an hour, look at all your training data, look at the event you're preparing for. We can set you power targets and give you advice on nutrition. We can talk about the logistics of the day, and we can really make sure that you go into race day feeling absolutely 100% prepared for everything that could throw at you, instead of feeling really scared and nervous and like you're just a passenger and that you're going to make mistakes and you're not going to finish. Even if you're not racing in a couple of weeks, I hope this has given you some insight and maybe hopefully inspired you to take on a slightly hillier, a slightly more challenging race. I would love that if more people took on races that had a bit more teeth, a bit more flavour to them, instead of always chasing the flattest, fastest courses. Well, thank you once again for your company. I'll see you all next week.